In the summer of 1994, something happened in America that FIFA has spent 30 years trying to recreate. 94,000 people filled a stadium in Pasadena, California for a World Cup final. Not in Brazil, not in Germany, in a country that didn't even have a professional soccer league. The crowd remains the largest ever assembled for a World Cup final, and the men running FIFA watched the numbers arrive: attendance, broadcast audiences, sponsor revenues, and understood something they would never quite be able to forget. America wasn't just a market, it was the only market that mattered at that scale. The story of why the World Cup returns to the United States in 2026 is not simply the story of what 1994 produced. It is the story of a 30-year institutional fixation. It is the story of a governing body that collapsed under the weight of its own corruption and then needed one specific country to pull it back upright. And it is the story of how $11 billion, the largest projected revenue in the history of organized sport, doesn't appear from nowhere. It gets built, deliberately, over decades. To understand how, you have to go back before 1994, all the way to 1988, when FIFA's Congress awarded the United States the tournament with an unusual condition attached. America had to establish a permanent professional soccer league. Not a request, a prerequisite. No league, no World Cup. That clause, buried in a hosting agreement signed nearly 40 years ago, is the reason Major League Soccer exists. FIFA wasn't just staging a tournament in America, it was trying to grow roots there. The roots took a long time to find soil. The North American Soccer League had already tried and collapsed. Pelé had arrived in New York in 1975, the greatest player the world had ever produced, joining the Cosmos specifically to prove the sport could survive in America. He was right about its potential. He was simply 20 years ahead of the infrastructure required to realize it. The NASL folded in 1984. The commercial ecosystem wasn't ready. Soccer persisted at the margins. Youth leagues, immigrant communities, periodic professional experiments that periodically failed. Then came 1994, and the margins disappeared. 3.5 million people attended, 69,000 per match. Corporate America, which had kept soccer at arm's length, engaged for the first time as a genuine commercial platform. Broadcast audiences shattered domestic projections. When Brazil defeated Italy on penalties at the Rose Bowl, before the largest crowd in World Cup final history, FIFA's leadership understood they had witnessed something that no other country could produce at equivalent scale. The question was never whether FIFA would return. The question was always when and at what price. Major League Soccer launched in 1996, fulfilling FIFA's condition. It was fragile from the beginning. By 2002, the league had contracted from 12 to 10 teams and came within an institutional decision of ceasing to exist entirely. The patience that kept it alive, from U.S. soccer, from investors, from people who believed 1994 had revealed a market rather than merely a moment, was remarkable and almost entirely invisible. That patience is now valued at approximately $500 million per franchise. The gap between those two realities is the story of what 30 years of quiet institutional commitment produces. But something happened between 1994 and 2026 that nobody in football's governing circles anticipated. It happened in a luxury hotel in Zurich before sunrise. May 27, 2015. Swiss police arrived at the Bor al Lac before dawn. 7 FIFA officials were walked from their rooms, some still in bathrobes, by officers acting on a request from American federal authorities. In New York, the Department of Justice unsealed a 47-count, 164-page indictment. 14 FIFA officials, more than $150 million in alleged bribes across more than 2 decades. The language in the document was clinical and absolute. 2 generations of soccer officials, it stated, had turned FIFA into a corrupt enterprise. The jurisdiction was elegant and lethal. American banks had processed the transactions. American soil had hosted connected events. That was sufficient. The same financial infrastructure that made the United States FIFA's most valuable commercial partner made it the most effective legal instrument anyone had ever aimed at the organization. The country FIFA needed most had just dismantled its leadership. 3 years later, 211 FIFA member associations gathered in a Congress hall in Moscow, the city hosting the opening of the Russian World Cup the following morning, and voted to award the 2026 tournament to the United States, Canada, and Mexico, 134 votes to 65. Morocco received 65. The United bid received more than twice as many. Sit with that sequence for a moment. The country that arrested FIFA's officials, forced its president's resignation, and secured more than 20 convictions, received FIFA's most commercially valuable tournament 3 years afterward. The prosecutor and the prosecuted needed each other badly enough that the relationship had to be rebuilt, fast, without much public ceremony about what had happened between them. Whether that rebuilding reflects genuine institutional transformation or something more convenient is a question the available evidence declines to settle cleanly. What the evidence does settle is the arithmetic. Fox Sports and Telemundo paid approximately $400 million combined for American broadcast rights to both the 2018 and 2022 World Cups. For 2026, same country, same language, same screens, but now hosting the tournament itself, industry estimates for American rights alone run from $1 billion to $1.5 billion. That isn't a modest uptick, it's a structural shift driven by one variable: geography. An American viewer watching a World Cup match represents, from the perspective of FIFA's corporate partners, the most commercially valuable eyeball on the planet. The advertising premium American audiences command is not replicable elsewhere at scale. FIFA's commercial division has understood this since 1994. The entire financial architecture of 2026 rests on it. And there is a dimension of that audience that almost nobody in mainstream sports media discusses properly. During the 2014 World Cup in Brazil, Telemundo's Spanish-language coverage outperformed Fox's English-language audience for certain matches. The most passionate World Cup viewers in the United States are not the ones American sports broadcasting typically centers. They are 63 million Hispanic and Latino Americans for whom football is not an emerging interest, but a generational inheritance. Families that watched the World Cup in Spanish long before American media decided soccer was worth covering seriously. Communities where the game never required selling. They built the audience that corporate America is now eager to monetize. That demographic reality, consistently underreported, commercially decisive, is one of the most significant untold variables in the entire 2026 calculation. FIFA didn't introduce soccer to America. A large part of America never needed the introduction. Meanwhile, something else was being constructed alongside all of this. In January 2017, FIFA approved the expansion of the World Cup from 32 to 48 teams, effective from 2026. 16 additional nations, 40 additional matches, 104 in total across 16 cities in 3 countries. FIFA's own financial modeling documented the revenue consequences before the vote was held. More matches generate more broadcast hours. More broadcast hours generate more advertising inventory. More inventory generates more sponsor revenue. The commercial logic preceded the footballing argument, and the documentation confirms it. The 48-team format divides people who care deeply about the game. The case on the other side, that expanded participation gives more of the world a stake in the tournament, that surprises and upsets from less established nations are among football's most cherished moments, is genuinely defensible. Both things can be true at the same time. What isn't genuinely debatable is that the format serves FIFA's commercial interests in ways that were calculated, documented, and primary. None of which fully accounts for what occurred in American soccer between the 2018 hosting award and the tournament itself. In July 2023, Lionel Messi, winner of the 2022 World Cup, 8-time Ballon d'Or, and one of 2 credible claimants to the title of greatest footballer in history, signed for Inter Miami in Major League Soccer. The deal structure reportedly included Apple TV Plus commitments, Adidas arrangements, and equity participation. It was as much a media transaction as a sporting one. The day he first appeared in Florida, the global media deployment was the kind reserved for visiting heads of state, because in the specific economy of football, that's exactly what he is. Messi's arrival accelerated something already gaining momentum. Apple TV Plus had signed a 10-year MLS deal in 2022, reportedly worth $2.5 billion, a bet on soccer becoming a fixture of American cultural life rather than merely a peripheral interest. Sports rights had become the most fiercely contested territory in the streaming wars, the last category of television that audiences still refuse to watch on delay. The 2026 World Cup lands at the peak of that competition, in the country where that competition is most intense, with the world's most famous footballer having spent the preceding years in American stadiums. Messi will be 38 when the 2026 final is played. Whether he is on the pitch or watching from a dugout is one of the tournament's defining open questions. Either version has its own weight. Either version is inescapable. There is another weight that the 2026 story carries less comfortably. The U.S. women's national team, the most decorated women's football program in history, spent years pursuing equal pay litigation against the very federation now presenting itself as the ideal home for the world game. The settlement in 2022 was $24 million. The Federation president, who had defended the Federation's position, resigned before the case concluded. The institutional questions the litigation surfaced were not answered by the settlement. They were postponed by it. The organization hosting the world's most commercially valuable tournament is the same organization whose most successful athletes needed a federal lawsuit to establish basic equity. That doesn't sit neatly beside the promotional language surrounding 2026. It sits inside it, whether acknowledged or not. There are other things that don't sit neatly. The DOJ's 2015 prosecution established a jurisdictional principle that remains in place. FIFA's commercial activities, when conducted through American financial infrastructure, fall within U.S. federal reach. The 2026 tournament's broadcast contracts, marketing arrangements, and ticketing revenues will involve American banks. Whether any of those arrangements draws renewed DOJ attention is met in every available public document with institutional silence from both sides. That silence isn't neutral. And then there is the context that FIFA's communications tend not to foreground. The 2026 FIFA World Cup is not only a sporting event, it is a commercial justification, the revenue engine that underwrites everything FIFA does commercially, including awarding the 2034 World Cup to Saudi Arabia, a decision already made, already defended, already producing the comparisons with Qatar that the 2026 American tournament is, consciously or not, designed to make easier to absorb. The sequence is not accidental. Russia, then Qatar, then the United States. Two tournaments awarded to authoritarian governments under a committee system that U.S. prosecutors later characterized as a racketeering enterprise, followed by a tournament in the world's most commercially powerful democracy. FIFA's public posture around this sequence has not been particularly subtle. America is the institutional deep breath, the market that validates everything else commercially. And in FIFA's logic, commercial validation and institutional legitimacy have always been more or less the same thing. Here is where 30 years of decisions have landed. The 2026 FIFA World Cup is the largest sporting event in measurable history. 48 nations, 104 matches, $11 billion projected, 16 cities spanning 3 countries, happening in the country that showed FIFA what a tournament could generate in 1994, and then spent the following 3 decades constructing the league, the broadcast infrastructure, the demographic audience, and the commercial ecosystem to prove that what happened in Pasadena wasn't a fluke. Nobody stumbled into this. Not America, not FIFA. This is the conclusion of a 30-year commercial negotiation conducted through bid documents and broadcast contracts and federal indictments and reform platforms and a streaming deal and one Argentine's decision about where to spend the final years of his career. The football will be real. The emotion in those stadiums will be genuine. The matches will matter in the way only football can make things matter. But the reason this tournament exists in these cities, at this scale, structured this way, that story runs underneath the pitch. It has been running for 30 years. This is Dark World Cup. The story beneath the story is always where we look. And there is always another one.